I turned 81 last March. My name is Eleanor, and I'm going to tell you something nobody said to me when I was young enough to actually use it. The things that quietly ruin your later years aren't the big dramatic disasters. They're not the accidents, the diagnoses, the losses, though those come too. The things that steal your time are small, invisible, ordinary. They look like responsibility. They feel like virtue. And by the time you see them clearly, you've already handed over years you can't ask back. I had a good life, a real one. 43 years married to a man named George, 3 children, a career in school administration that I loved and that loved me back. We weren't wealthy, but we were never wanting. And when I retired at 64, I thought the hard work of living was mostly behind me. I was wrong. The hardest work was still ahead, and I wasn't ready for it. Not because life got harder, but because I was still carrying weight I'd been hauling since my 30s, habits and fears and people-pleasing that I'd never once stopped to question. And between 64 and 81, those things cost me more than I ever expected. So here are the 7 things I'd have dropped immediately, without apology, without ceremony, without waiting to be sure. The first is keeping up with people who don't actually know you. When I retired, I had what I called my community. Women from the PTA, from church committees, from the neighborhood association I'd chaired for 11 years. Dozens of them. And I spent enormous energy staying visible to all of them, attending their events, remembering their grandchildren's names, sending cards for every birthday and graduation and condolence. At 67, I had knee surgery. Minor, routine, nothing dramatic. I was home for 6 weeks. You know how many of those dozens of women called to check on me? 4. And 2 of them called once, left messages, and never followed up. I lay there in my living room with my leg elevated, watching daytime television I'd never watched before, and I did the math. I had spent years, maintaining relationships that would not even notice if I disappeared for 6 weeks. My friend Dorothy, who I'd known since we were both young mothers pushing strollers around the same park, called every 3 days, brought me soup twice, sat with me for an afternoon and talked about things that actually mattered, what we were afraid of, what we still wanted, whether we'd lived the way we meant to. That was real. The rest was social furniture. After I recovered, I stopped maintaining the furniture. I let cards go unsent, events unattended, group chats unanswered, and not one of those relationships collapsed in a way that hurt me, because none of them were holding anything real to begin with. I focused on Dorothy, on my sister Ruth, on 3 or 4 women who knew the actual version of me, not the capable, organized, always has-it-together Eleanor I performed for everyone else. I wish I'd done it at 50. I did it at 67. That's 17 years of energy poured into performances when I could have been building something that actually held me up. The second is treating the future like it's guaranteed. George wanted a boat. Not a big one, a small sailboat, something he could take out on the lake on weekends. He'd been talking about it since our 50s. Every few years he'd find one he liked, show me the listing, and I'd say some version of, "Let's wait until we're more settled." More settled, as if we hadn't already raised 3 children and paid off a house and put money away for 30 years. At 68, he bought the boat. Without asking me, which was completely unlike him. He came home and said, "Eleanor, I'm 68. I'm not waiting anymore." And he was right. I was furious for about a week, and then I watched him on that water, the way his whole body changed when he was sailing, relaxed in a way I hadn't seen in decades. And I thought, what exactly was I protecting us from? We had 4 beautiful years with that boat. He died at 72 from a stroke, sudden and without warning. 3 days before he died, we were out on the water together. He let me steer, which he'd been trying to teach me for years, and I finally got it. The boat responded, and I felt it, this aliveness, this rightness. I laughed out loud. So did he. That memory is worth more than whatever I thought I was saving us from. After he was gone, I found myself looking at our accounts, comfortable, careful, responsible, and feeling something close to grief about all the years I'd treated money like it was the point instead of the tool. Money is the tool. Time is the point. We almost got that backwards. If you have something you've been waiting to do until conditions are perfect, I need you to hear me. The conditions are not going to get more perfect. Do the thing now while you still can, while the people you'd do it with are still here. The third is eating the way you ate at 40. I was a good cook, still am, though I cook very differently now. For most of my adult life, food was how I showed love. Big Sunday dinners, homemade bread, dessert, as a matter of course. Nobody ever left my table hungry. I was proud of that. What I didn't understand was that my body at 65 was not the same body that needed those meals. I kept feeding it the same way, and it stopped cooperating. Weight I'd never struggled with before settled in and wouldn't move. My energy crashed every afternoon. My knees, which had been fine, started aching constantly. I saw 4 different doctors about the knee pain. Got x-rays, got an MRI, got anti-inflammatory medications, got a cortisone injection. Not one of them asked what I was eating. At 71, my daughter Claire, who had been researching nutrition obsessively since her own health scare, sat me down and walked me through what she'd learned. Quietly, carefully, without lecturing. She just laid out what she'd found. How inflammation works, how protein becomes critical as we age, how blood sugar swings affect energy and mood and joint pain. I changed how I ate. Not drastically, not dramatically. I still cooked real food, still sat down for real meals. But I ate less, added more protein, reduced the bread and sugar that had been constants my whole life. Within 4 months, my knee pain was noticeably better. Within 8 months, my afternoon energy crash was mostly gone. I think about the 6 years before that, 65 to 71, when I felt heavier and slower than I needed to. 6 years of unnecessary fatigue, 6 years of pain I could have reduced. Because nobody told me, and I didn't ask, and I kept assuming that what worked at 40 still applied. It doesn't. Find out what your body actually needs now, at this age, and then give it that, not what you always gave it. The fourth is giving answers when someone needed you to ask questions. My youngest, Thomas, is a quiet man, always has been. He thinks before he speaks, the opposite of me, honestly. And for most of his adult life, I handled that difference by filling the silence. With advice, with observations, with stories about what I had done in similar situations. I thought I was being helpful. At 70, Thomas stopped calling as often. When we talked, he was pleasant but brief. I told George I thought something was wrong, that Thomas seemed distant, and George looked at me with that patient way he had and said, "Eleanor, have you ever just asked him how he is and then waited long enough for him to actually tell you?" I had not really. I'd ask and then answer my own question before he had a chance. After George died, Thomas drove 4 hours to be with me the first week. He stayed for 5 days. And somewhere in those 5 days, grief having stripped away all my habits, I stopped performing and just sat with him, asked him things and actually waited, listened to his answers without preparing my response while he was still talking. He told me things That week I hadn't known in 40 years of being his mother, about what he'd struggled with, about what he loved about his work, about how much he'd missed his father specifically in ways I hadn't expected, about what he was afraid of. I wept, not from sadness, from the realization of how much I'd missed by talking when I should have been listening. All those years, and I hadn't known him, not really. I'd known the version of him that fit into my conversations. We talk differently now. I ask. I wait. I find out who he actually is instead of who I assumed. It's better than anything I managed before, and it cost me 40 years. Ask questions, real ones, then be quiet long enough to actually hear the answer. The fifth is sitting because you've earned the right to. Retirement felt like a finish line. I had moved constantly for 40 years, on my feet at school, running children to activities, managing a house, managing a career. When I finally stopped, I wanted to rest. And I did rest. Beautifully, thoroughly, for about 3 years too long. By 68, I noticed I was getting winded on stairs. By 69, getting up from the floor, if I ever got there, which I stopped doing, required significant effort. By 70, my doctor used the word deconditioning, and I pretended I didn't understand what it meant. I understood. I had stopped moving, and my body had started assuming movement was no longer required. My neighbor Helen is 79, and she swims 3 times a week, has since her 50s. She moved into the neighborhood when we were both in our late 60s, and I used to watch her walk to her car at 6 in the morning with her swim bag and feel vaguely guilty. Now I watch her carry groceries and climb her porch steps and move through the world like someone who lives in her body, not someone who is trapped in it, and I feel something more like longing. I started walking at 71, just 30 minutes most mornings through the neighborhood, nothing remarkable. And the difference it made, to my sleep, to my mood, to the simple physical confidence of moving through space without worrying about falling, was more than I expected. But I can't recover what I lost between 65 and 71. Muscle doesn't come back the way it leaves. I can maintain what I've rebuilt, and I do, but the version of 81 I'm living now would have been different if I'd started moving again at 65 instead of treating stillness as my reward. Retirement is not permission to stop. It's permission to move differently. Don't stop. The sixth is chasing numbers instead of paying attention to how you actually feel. After George's stroke, I became obsessed with my own health statistics. Blood pressure, cholesterol, blood sugar. I monitored everything, recorded it, brought spreadsheets to doctor's appointments. I was terrified, and the numbers were where I put the fear. My doctor, who was thorough and kind and very focused on optimization, responded to my monitoring by adjusting medications whenever anything drifted outside the ideal range. By 74, I was taking 8 pills a day. 8. Some were for conditions, some were for the side effects of the first conditions. I was medicated against every deviation from a perfect number, and I felt genuinely terrible. Foggy, tired, disconnected, like I was living behind glass. At 75, I switched doctors, not because anything went wrong, but because I moved closer to Claire, and her doctor had space in her practice. This new doctor, at my first appointment, asked me something no one had asked in years. She said, "How do you feel?" Not your numbers. You. How do you feel day to day? I didn't know how to answer. I'd stopped tracking that. She looked at my medication list and said, "Some of these numbers we're treating are normal for your age. We've been optimizing you for a body that's 30 years younger. Let's figure out what health actually looks like for an active 75-year-old. We removed 4 medications over 6 months. Carefully, gradually, with monitoring, and I came back. The fog lifted, the exhaustion lifted. I started feeling like myself again. Numbers are information. They are not the goal. How you feel, your energy, your clarity, your ability to do the things that matter to you, that is the goal. Don't let anyone lose track of that, including yourself. The seventh, and the one that cost me the most, is measuring your life by other people's highlights. The year I turned 65, 3 different couples in our circle went to Europe. One went to Italy, one to Greece, one to Portugal. I saw the photographs, beautiful photographs. Cobblestone streets and ancient ruins and golden light and couples who looked like they were living inside a painting. George and I went to visit his brother in Vermont that summer. We stayed in a small rental cabin by a pond, swam every morning, read in the afternoons, made dinner together every night with produce from a farm stand down the road, went to bed early and woke up early and did it again. I spent the whole week vaguely dissatisfied, measuring that beautiful, quiet week against photographs of cobblestone streets I'd seen on someone else's vacation. And it poisoned something I should have been entirely inside. A few years later, one of those couples divorced. One came home with a parasite that took 6 months to treat. I don't say that with any satisfaction, only to point out that the photographs never told the whole story. They never do. My granddaughter, who is 26 and very wise, talks about comparing your behind the scenes to everyone else's highlight reel. I didn't have that language at 65, but the thing she's describing is ancient, and it has stolen happiness from people across every generation. That Vermont week, the pond, the farm stand, the early mornings, that was my life. Really mine. Not a photograph, not a performance, not something arranged to look a certain way. And I spent it wishing it looked like someone else's vacation. I'm done with that. At 81, sitting on my porch most mornings with coffee and whatever birds are passing through, I do not compare it to anyone else's morning. It is mine, and it is enough, and some days it is more than enough. It is exactly what I want, and wanting exactly what you have is not settling. It is one of the hardest and best things a person can learn. Those are the 7 things, not dramatic, not revolutionary. But if I'd understood them at 64 instead of learning them slowly and expensively across 17 years, I would have lived those years differently, more fully inside them, less busy managing them from the outside. You still have time. Not unlimited time. Nobody does. But enough time for this to matter. Drop the performances. Spend the money on the life, not the safety net. Feed your body what it actually needs now. Listen more than you talk. Keep moving. Chase how you feel, not what the numbers say. And stop measuring your real life against everyone else's curated version of theirs. That's all. That's everything. Take good care of yourself.